professor, I'm used to a podium. So, can you hear me back there? Yeah, okay, good. Little drink of gin, I'm joking. But after that, I could use one. It is a great honor and a pleasure to be here to honor a legacy. Now, I've been called a legacy. In reality, Luis and I are the granddaddies and probably great-granddaddies of this thing we call Chicano theater. You are my daughter, Julia, because your students are my grandchildren. Your students are my I don't know how many greats there are anymore, because when you've been around as long as Luis and I have been, there's a long trajectory of, hopefully, of success and frustration. I didn't get it in the program, but the title of my presentation is actually The Legacy of Luis Valdez and El Teatro Campesino, the first 50 years. My biggest challenge is to coalesce 50 years into 15 minutes. That's what they gave me. I've been writing about teatro and Luis since 1970, when I was 5. And he was 7, because he's 2 years older than I am. Our colleague says my nose is already grown, and my students know how long my nose can get. This is, after all, theater. And in theater, we create, we perform. I began researching and directing this thing called Chicano Theater in 1970, before I was actually a Chicano. And I have to tell you, when I first saw the Teatro Campesino, my wife and I were living in Riverside, where I was teaching drama, high school drama, in a little high school out there, and they went to perform in UC Riverside, and I was Jorge Huerta. Not Jimenez, that should have been George Grove, that would have completed the picture. So I had a lot to learn. I was definitely a Mexican-American, and I began to learn because of the farm workers theater, because of the Chicano movement, what it was, what it meant to be a Chicano. So here we go, 50 years and 15 minutes. When I think about a theatrical legacy, I usually imagine that the person or theater group that has left a legacy is no longer with us. Indeed, my Webster's defines legacy as anything handed down from the past, as from an ancestor. Does that make you feel old, Dr. Valdez?
Older by the minute.
But what if that legacy of that ancestor still exists and is sitting in the room, feeling older? Thankfully, both Luis and his better half, Lupe, are still with us, as well as Danny and other members of the Teatro Campesino family who are with us today. They're very much alive, but they are now classics, because they have withstood the test of time. Everything they have produced is still as relevant, entertaining, educational, necessary as it was 50 years ago. They say that art is essential in a civilized society, and the art that Luis and the Teatro have conceived in their ensemble proves that statement. So this is about the role of the artist in a society in crisis. The Teatro and its founder have gone through several incarnations since 1965. In its first 15 years, the troupe evolved from a farm workers theater to a community-based student troupe to an international touring company producing and publishing films, recordings, and anthologies of plays, and finally to a professional producing organization. I believe that all of the theatrical activity of Chicanas and Chicanos, indeed Latinas and Latinos that we see today, stem from what this theater has done over the time that we're talking about. They owe their existence directly or indirectly to the Teatro Campesino and to Mr. Luis Valdez and the other members of the group. I begin this discussion with the earliest examples of the Teatro Campesino's aesthetic and political legacies because these continue to hold sway with many community-based and student teatros working today across the land. But Chicana and Chicano theater artists have come a long way since the early days of the Chicano theater movement. This professionalization, as I call it, of Chicano theater can be attributed to individual efforts, certainly, but one cannot ignore the impact of Zoot Suit. and in this evolutionary process of becoming professionals. Demographics and economics notwithstanding, Zoot Suit opened the doors to the mainstream. And although that play has been attributed to Luis, it demonstrates the work of the collective as well. That magnificent play with music combines elements of the acto, which Julia talked about and I'll talk a little more about, the corrido, the carpa, and mito, with living newspaper techniques to dramatize a Chicano family in crisis, which is what all of our plays are about. The members of the Teatro Campesino of that period can take pride in knowing that their collective exercises inspired and invigorated the playwright-director to create the most important play written and or directed by a Chicano to date, a formidable legacy. But one can never really return to the past because conditions change. The young people who make up today's Teatro Campesino are perhaps the original troupe's most vital living legacy. Guinan Valdez has taken over the role of artistic director and is continuing the legacy as a brilliant director, actor, playwright, and motivator, like his dad, along with the younger generation of Campesino members. These descendants of the original founders were literally born into the Teatro Campesino. Their training was hands-on from the time they could speak, benefiting from the years of workshops, performances, and tours that their parents would take them on, diaper bags in hand. I am treating the Teatro Campesino as a collective entity because the teatro and its founder are sometimes interchangeable. How can you talk about the one without the other? Perhaps the Teatro Campesino could have emerged under the direction and tutelage of another person, but that would have been a completely different group. However collective the work of the teatro may have been in the group's first 15 years, I know that Valdez guided the group with his own worldview, an aesthetic, spiritual, and political vision that drove his creative spirit. Learning is a two-way process, and neither the director nor the teatro members could have continued their artistic development without a dedicated and constantly evolving ensemble. The theatrical form that dominated the teatro's presentations from 1965 to 1970 was, indeed, the acto that Julia has referred to, so named by Valdez for expedience's sake, the acto. An acto is a short, usually comic sketch, often created through improvisation, that is designed to be performed anywhere. The actos were ideally suited for the teatro's initial efforts to get farm workers to join the union Cesar Chavez and Jorge Huerta, no relation, were founding. In the typical acto, the heroes and villains are clearly defined, and the solution is either hinted at or clearly stated. Join the union, boycott grapes, and etc. The acto form is one of the most important aesthetic and political legacies from the early Teatro Campesino. And although the aesthetic legacy is sometimes difficult to separate from the political, in the realm of aesthetics, the teatro developed what has sometimes been called the rascuache aesthetic. The Mexican term rascuache is described by Professor Tomás Ibarra-Frausto thus: Rascuachismo is harsh and hybrid, sending shudders through the ranks of the elite who seek solace in less exuberant, more muted and purer traditions. In an environment always on the verge of falling apart, the car, the job, the toilet, things are held together with grit, spit, and movidas. As many of you know, movidas are the coping strategies that we use to gain time, to make options, to retain hope. Rascuachismo is a truly Chicano term, a condition of the working class understood by the people who have had to negotiate the uncertainties of life en el norte, north of Mexico. As an aesthetic, the earliest Teatro Campesino actos were truly rascuache. Because the group had no money, they had to be prepared to perform anywhere, usually outdoors, and design elements came together by chance. The actos were simple, but not simplistic, inventive by necessity. Therefore, signs around the necks of the actors mark the characters clearly, and masks further delineate the villain, pig mask, from the heroes, no mask. Costumes were found, and the exaggerated props were put together in somebody's kitchen. Rascuache aesthetic cannot be designed, it just happens. During the first 15 years of the Teatro's trajectory, the group developed other performance genres. These forms were the mito, or myth, the corrido, and the carpa. The mito was more of a personal statement for Valdez and his efforts to rescue the Chicano's indigenous heritage. The Teatro's invocations of indigenous thought and culture can be seen in many of the plays written by Chicanas and Chicanos today, which employ either actual indigenous characters or symbols on stage, or even flutes and drums as background music, recalling the ancient Mesoamerican cultures that preceded the Spaniards. Another genre that can be termed unique to the teatro is the corrido, first explored as a performance technique in 1971. The Teatro Campesino's initial social-political legacy can be clearly seen in the various themes their actos and songs and other performance techniques exposed in presentations across the country and even abroad, bringing the plight of the Mexicanos to a wide variety of audiences. The teatro became the voice for the voiceless, giving Chicano audiences in particular a sense of belonging in a society that had ignored and suppressed them for generations. Sadly, every one of the issues the teatro exposed is still relevant today. Those issues, in the order of their appearance in their collectively created actos, which are for sale right outside here, are farm labor, cultural denial, Miss Jimenez, internal colonization, lack of equitable educational opportunities, inner conflicts in the Chicano movement itself, police brutality, an unjust judicial system, and the disproportionate number of Chicanos that were dying in Vietnam. Although strides have been made in some of these areas, every one of these issues and more still plague the Mexicano community. Since the teatro located to San Juan Bautista in 1971, their centro became a mecca for theater artists, scholars, and students who went there to observe the work or to participate in the ongoing workshops. Along with the members of today's Teatro Campesino, perhaps the troupe's most obvious legacy is found in other Chicano theater troupes and individual theater artists that this company inspired. One of the earliest teatros that owed its genesis and its creative expressions to the Teatro Campesino was the Teatro Urbano, founded right here in San Jose by none other than Luisa's younger brother, Danny. This became the first documented urban teatro following in the footsteps of the Teatro Campesino. It seems that everywhere the teatro performed, they inspired others to create their own teatros, widening the field. In 1970, the teatro began to organize and host Chicano theater festivals in an effort to assess the field and to enhance the development of these mainly student groups just beginning to explore their roles as cultural workers. By 1973, the number of teatros had swelled to at least 64 active groups. Within 10 years of the creation of the Teatro Campesino, the movement had almost single-handedly fostered a national theater movement. And although few of those teatros are still operating, the teatro had a very real reach into the hearts and minds of the groups, their individual members, and the widening circle of audiences. The publication of the teatro's first actos in 1971 gave new teatros excellent and effective actos to produce, adapt, and emulate. The anthology was the first of its kind. Until that book appeared, no other collection of actos or plays by or about Chicanos had ever been published. Teatros throughout the country began to produce these quintessential actos, changing locations, names, or other signifiers to best suit their audiences. Farm worker actos were transposed to urban workers' struggles. Los Vendidos was adapted to suit a particular community's stereotypes. The educational issues exposed in No Saco Nada de la Escuela, or I Don't Get Anything Out of School, led to many variations on that important theme, especially since so many of the groups were student. The messages were clear. The Chicana and Chicano had grievances and they had better be addressed. Many people, especially students who witnessed those and other actos, suddenly became active participants in demonstrations, boycotts, sit-ins, and other activities dedicated to improving the conditions of their people. Although a handful of teatros from the early 70s are still operating, other companies have been founded in their wake. And although we can trace the influence of the teatro in Valdez from coast to coast, I want to just highlight two theater groups that can trace their beginnings to this city. One is Teatro Visión, The other is the Latino Theater Company, Teatro Visión of San Jose, which I'll talk about, and the Latino Theater Company of Los Angeles. Teatro Visión evolved from Teatro Urbano to Teatro de la Gente, founded by Manuel Martinez and Adrián Vargas, to Teatro Visión, founded by Elisa Marina Alvarado in 1986. Elisa had been a prominent member of Teatro de la Gente and an active participant in the National Coalition of Teatros, which we called TENAS, Teatro Nacional de Aztlán, or the National Theater of Aztlán. Elisa founded Teatro Visión along with other Chicanas, read women, eager to make the women's voices heard. And she continues to lead the teatro, running the company much as the early teatros did as a collective. Like all of today's Chicana and Latino theater companies, Visión has a wonderful website, which you should visit, but not now. You should also go to their performances and support them right here in San Jose. Jose Luis Valenzuela, like Elisa, had also been a member of Teatro de la Gente. He is the founding artistic director of the Latino Theater Company, as I said, and the head of the Los Angeles Theater Center in downtown LA. In an old bank in downtown LA, the LATC boasts 5 performance spaces, the largest and most comprehensive teatro facility in the country to date. In 1986, Valenzuela and his wife, Evelina Fernandez, playwright and actress, moved to LA where they founded this company, eager to perform and produce, to write plays that spoke to their community as an ensemble with Evelina as the prominent playwright. All of the members of this group, the Latino Theater Company, had impressive resumes of acting experience in Hollywood as well as in Chicano theaters. Like many other Latino actors working in Hollywood, some had been in zoot suit, either in Los Angeles or New York, or both and or in the film. The number of people that owe their careers to this group and to this gentleman is very extraordinary. They each brought a knowledge of professional theater and film to the company and were crucial to its success, acting in almost all of the plays the company produced. In the fall of 2014, and I've jumped way ahead here, 50 years, the Los Angeles Theater Center and the Latino Theater Company, under the direction of Valenzuela, organized and hosted a major event, the Encuentro 2014, which was a month-long festival of Latino theater companies from across the country and Puerto Rico. I dare say that everybody in this Encuentro was there because of the tenacity, the tenas, of the pioneers hosting festivals and workshops in order to grow aesthetically as well as politically. From flatbed trucks and tin can lighting to this incredible facility, from mimeograph flyers to websites and Google, we've come a long way, baby. This was the first festival of its kind, the result of years of fundraising and collaborating with the recently formed Latino Theater Commons. The LTC, as we refer to it, is a national coalition of Latino theater companies dedicated to the dissemination and networking of Latino theater by, for, and about Latinos, about our community. You can go online, Latino Theater Commons, and get an assessment of all of the wonderful things that have been happening, of which Guinan Valdez of the Teatro Campesino was one of the leading forces and motivators. Judging from the postings on social media and the Latino Theater Commons website, many of the artists and scholars involved in the Encuentro 2014 returned to their respective companies, universities, and communities with a renewed sense of purpose. We continue to learn from one another in the tradition of the earliest festivals organized by the Teatro Campesino. The times have changed, the technology has changed, but people remain people, and that Encuentro and the recent Carnaval Festival of New Latino Plays in Chicago, which we were at, are living proof that the future of Latino theater is in very good hands. In conclusion, the Teatro Campesino lives today not only as a world-renowned theater company, but also in the thousands of people whose lives were changed by their performances, or a performance of one of their actos or Valdez's plays produced by another teatro, a university, a mainstream theater company, and do not discount the millions of people who have witnessed the films. The teatro lives in the continuing work of so many people who pass through the troupe's cultural centers. It lives in the people who participated in workshops produced by the teatro members either at home or on tour. The teatro continues to inspire, giving the Chicana and Chicano a sense of place and a pride in who they are. Remember that I've titled this presentation, The First 50 Years, subtitled it, The First 50 Years. Well, here's to the next 50 years as the legacy continues. Thank you.